Hello everybody, this is John Cree. I'm a director of the Forest School Association and been involved with Forest School delivery and training for many years now. One of the founding directors from the Forest School Association, and today we'll be looking at the training and reflective practitioner principle as one of these series in this series of seminars around the Forest School principles. I'm talking to Lily Horseman.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm Lily. I'm the current chair of the Forest School Association, and I'm involved with Forest School practice and Forest School training as well. So from the point of view of being a trainer, obviously thinking about training and the process is something that's really interesting. But also the Forest School Association have been working with lots of awarding organisations recently to try and really bring some commonality across all of the different qualifications. So that's quite interesting, a piece of work that the FSA, the Forest School Association, have been doing. But also the element of being a reflective practitioner is something that's, I think, so key to what all Forest School practitioners do or should be doing. So thinking and reflecting on reflecting. Oh, I always like it when we go down a level. So yeah, that's why I've enjoyed thinking about this recently. Thank you.
Yes, reflecting about reflecting. That whole meta thinking stuff is really important, isn't it? And I agree. I think once we stop learning and growing and changing, because we do, we stop living. So before we dive in, just a little bit about the Forest School Association. As I said, this is a series of conversations around the 6 principles that we are producing. The Forest School Association was established back in 2012, but the principles actually were formulated with big consultation with the whole Forest School community before the association was formed. So these 6 principles, which, if you like, the Forest School Association is championing, were put together by the Forest School profession in many ways. And one of our jobs, as you've quite rightly said, is trying to maintain the standard of Forest School, both training and delivery, so that both the leaders and the learners, and the leaders are also the learners, are getting a good quality experience. And I guess that's our mission, is to support practitioners, trainers, anybody in the Forest School community delivering quality Forest School for all. So if you want to know more about that, you can look at our website, Forest School Association. We'll come back to that at the end. And Forest School is very much an ethos-based practice. It is about the ethos of this child-centered learning long-term, and if you look at some of the other seminars we've done on the other principles, it is about that. And we have guidance, various criteria and guidances around each of the principles. So this principle, if I just read it to you, just so people know what we're talking about, is one of the 6. And it says, Forest School is run by qualified Forest School practitioners who continuously develop their professional practice. Forest School is run by qualified Forest School practitioners who continuously develop their practice. So, first question then, Lily, is I just wonder whether you could expand a bit more on what that means. What do we mean by qualified Forest School practitioner, and what do we mean by continuous professional development?
When we're talking about qualified Forest School practitioners, it's interesting to look at what the qualifications are. So there's the level 3 Forest School practitioner qualification, leader qualification, and that's the one that's widely understood as being the one that qualifies people to deliver Forest School programs. There's also the level 2 qualification, which is an assistant qualification, and the level 1, which is an introduction to the Forest School principles. The qualifications, however, there's some variation across different awarding organisations, and in Scotland and in Wales, subtle variations on the qualification. And then when you look outside of the UK, there are other qualifications that are called Forest School qualifications that may again have different standards. So that's something that's quite interesting in terms of the Forest School community. What they all have in common, however, is that grounding in what Forest School is and how to deliver programs. And then when we think about continuous professional development, it's taking each of those elements that's introduced in the training, and each of them you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and that's part of our continuous professional development as forest school practitioners, is to take each of those elements and really think about how much of a challenge they are for us and what we know about them and how we can go into each of those elements. And there's something I use in my own training, in my own practice, which is a wonky wheel, and it maps each of the elements of forest school practice, and it helps you reflect on where are you. You know, is it just something that's emerging, or is it something that's really well grown, really solid? You know, like a tree trunk that's mapped on a wood slice. And that, I find that really valuable in terms of my own professional development, in allowing me to target what it is that I'm focusing on. So, for example, at the moment, I'm really nerding out about like the stuff in nature that I've discovered that I don't know. You know, there's always the things you didn't know about. And that's something that I identified when I was last mapping. Is like, actually, I thought I knew about stuff because I knew about trees, but then there's all of these other levels of understanding nature that I really need to explore as well. So looking at that and reflecting on your own practice helps you identify your continuing professional development.
So it sounds like what you're saying, from my perspective, even if you're a trainer, and the trainers are often seen as at a certain level, I'm often asked by people, well, I've got my level 3, where do I go now? Can I get a level 4? And the only level 4 we've got is for trainers, in effect. And it seems that you know everything, but actually it's not the case at all. And that actually, if we're gonna, even when we started to train to become qualified, it's that reflection all the way through. And trainers still have lots of training, professional development to do. I know that over 3 school years now that I'm like you. I just there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, this COVID thing has opened up for me the whole somatic trauma stuff, which we know being outside can help, but I don't have much experience of that. But you can see that aspect of forest school in terms of health and well-being and learning and development can really help. So yeah. How do you, as a trainer, work with your learners who are in training, who might be at different stages on the wonky wheel? How does that work if we're trying to bring them up to this qualified standard of level 3?
That right there is one of the most interesting processes that goes on during a training course. So one of the things that I experience, we talk about all these qualifications being subtly different, but actually each course that I run and each group that I work with, the process again is slightly different, because you're responding to the needs and the interests of the group. So you're always trying to balance. There's this sort of tension between the learning outcomes, the things that you need to assess in order to accredit the qualification, and on the other side of that, the experience, people actually going through the process of experiencing what it's like to be a learner in forest school, and exposing people to those things that they maybe wouldn't go to without that training process. Because that's the other thing, isn't it, that you know, my own learning, I tend to go to things that interest me, but actually with the forest school training, you're often taking people to explore things that are the bits that they go, oh, you know, I'm not gonna, that's not that interesting to me. Well, why isn't it? Let's look at why it's not interesting, and why you're avoiding those things. So yeah, you get to go in all sorts of interesting places with a training cohort. And I think, going back to something you were saying earlier, John, I think we need to just kind of bust the myth early doors of experts, because actually just an expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less. And the forest school ethos is so broad and so rich and encompasses so many things that nobody's an expert, right? We all have real strengths and interests in different areas, and having these conversations we've been doing through the seminars has really highlighted how we all approach even the principles with our own interests and knowledge and experience. And so to say that one person is the expert on forest school is to do the whole ethos a disservice. And I think the other thing that I know is that the more I kind of think, oh, well, maybe I know a bit about forest school these days, because, you know, I've been around a bit, and and I chair the Forest School Association, and then I'll go out into the woods with a group of children and think, right, I need to really focus, and I need to learn, and I need to think, and I need to reflect. You know, it's a continuous process. So yeah, that what are the next steps for a trained forest school practitioner are really interesting. And I think we all need to examine our own learning and what we took from the training course if we're a trained practitioner, or what we would like from the training courses if that's something you're interested in, and then think, right, how can I deepen, especially the bits that maybe I avoided or didn't focus on, or weren't the bits that excited me. Why did I avoid those? How can I steer into those, so that when you go out of your own comfort zone, that's when other people can move into theirs. And as facilitators, as practitioners, that's one of the things we need to consistently be doing, is going, right, where's my edge? I need to keep just moving forward a little bit because somebody else's comfort zone is out there. Yeah.
I just wonder, before we go into, because I want to delve into the reflection process a lot more and how do we move forward. But it's what is it that the qualification gives to enable forest school leaders to start delivering this complex, holistic way of learning, literally running your own school outside, in inverted commas. What does the qualification actually do? And give us an idea of just the amount of time it takes before we launch into that development bit, in terms of this. Imagine yourself green to this. I'm entering to be a forest school practitioner. I bring everything I've brought with me. What do I need to do to get onto that ladder? I often see it as a driving test. Passing the forest school qualification, you've passed the driving test, but you're not a driver yet. It's a bit like that. So what does that getting to that driving test level entail before we launch into that reflective stuff?
So using that driving test metaphor is quite an interesting one. So some of it is about understanding the place that you're in, you know, like the rules of the road, what's actually happening in the environment. And that's something that somebody's evaluation of a forest school training course from a couple of years ago, I remember reading their evaluation and them saying, you know, that they developed this real full relationship with nature through the training process, because you're out there a lot and you're exploring it in different ways. So really understanding the place that you're in is part of it. There's also thinking about the learning and development of the children and the different theories that support that, and that again is another part of the qualification. And quite a big part of the qualification is developing your own handbook, your own resource book. So what is it that you need in order to run effective forest school programs? So, you know, your policies and your procedures and your risk assessments and all those sort of things, which is often seen as the more boring side of forest school. But do you know what? It's the bit that will make it work. It's the bit that when you go through all of those pieces of paper, you are activating your working memory. You're going through it, like actually not just copying and pasting somebody else's work, but just going through it and thinking through, how will I react? How will I respond? How do I want other people to be? That puts all of that stuff in your working memory in an environment where you're calm and it's all okay, so that when you're out there in the chaos of running a session and it's all happening and somebody then is doing this, you've thought through those processes beforehand. So one of the things that I think is really key about the training and being there and going through those steps is about actually allowing all of that stuff to be in your working memory, so that you feel a lot more confident when you're then out there with the children to respond to what's happening, rather than trying to work out what to do. You know, you've done that already. And I often call all of those policies and risk assessments and all those sort of things the power paper. You know, the things like you hold up your power paper and you go, right, it's okay, it's all fine, you can back off, I've got a risk assessment. And it's the thing that gives other people confidence in us as practitioners, that you've gone through that process, you've thought through those things. So that's, I think, a really key aspect of the training. And actually a part of the training as well is to deliver programs with groups of children and young people and go through that experience and reflect on that with other people as part of a community of learners thinking about how it is to deliver forest school. So again, that's something that has real value in terms of being able to reflect alongside other people as part of a cohort of trainee practitioners. Does that answer your question? There was more in that question.
Yeah, no, I think that answers most of it. So it is, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is it's theory based in practice. So it is very much, isn't it, this practitioner based thing. It is getting out there and doing it. But the key part of that, me also as a trainer, is how they reflect on that through the training process. I'd like to just dig into how you enable people to reflect on their own experiences, reflect on what they bring to the thing through their initial training, but then how does that continue on afterwards? So I suppose it's just digging in a bit more into the reflective process and what that means for you.
Well, let's maybe start with a bit of a definition of what reflection is, because that's quite a solid starting point, isn't it? We talk about being a reflective practitioner and we talk about reflective practice, but if we look at actually what we mean by reflection, and the words are often helpful, aren't they? We like to unpick what words mean. So reflection, like looking in a mirror, is looking at yourself in something. So as a reflective practitioner, I'm often looking at myself in something and looking at my role, my interactions, and how that's affected what's happening. And that's different from reviewing, which is like review, like watching a program again. So, looking at a TV program and reviewing it, watching it again, just going through the process without any other layers, just revisiting those. And one of the analogies that I find myself drawn to is I went on a training course and we had fig rolls and we had Garibaldi biscuits. That doesn't tell you anything about that person's experience. It's a review. It's just a revisit of something that happened. I do always have fig rolls and Garibaldi biscuits because they're the good ones. But why do I choose Garibaldi's and why do I choose fig rolls? And for me, actually, they hold lots of memories of visiting my great grandmother, who had a little tin of them by her on her kitchen side, and that's the reflection in it, right? It's the same topic, the biscuits on a training course, but the reflection is why am I drawn to that, and then what does that do for other people? It's actually when they come on courses, those biscuits are quite evocative, so they're like, oh, I haven't had a fig roll for ages, and it opens up things for other people. And I've noticed that about those biscuit choices, so it's now a conscious process. So the same thing, I can be reflecting and seeing myself in that, my own memories and experience, but also then what that does for other people. It's the same topic, but me just telling you that I have fig rolls and Garibaldi biscuits on my training courses doesn't give you any of that other depth and richness. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. It's like, well, what's that all about? Why Garibaldi's? It's asking that question, why, isn't it? I'm getting from that. Why do I go for that? And why has that got meaning for me? And what have I missed? I think that's the key. So how do you, on the initial training, get people to almost dig a bit deeper to find out, to observe what they don't know? And we often don't know what we don't know, but actually that's often the interesting nugget, isn't it? So what have I missed in that? Why not digestives as opposed to Garibaldi's? So what else is out there that I haven't really reflected on?
We're going to want biscuits after this conversation.
We are going to want biscuits. I was thinking my thing is crumpets. It's just I just bring crumpets because.
Right, let's not go on a snack tangent.
Sorry, we've gone off on one.
I'm going to bring it back from the snack tangent to the how. So the why, it helps explore those other levels that we might not have thought about. It helps us look at things in different ways, and the how, and actually using lots of different ways to reflect is one of the things that I try and do through training, partly to model for other people how I might work with groups of children, but also for them to be able to access reflection in a way that kind of opens it up for them. So it might be through drawing or creating or making things out of nature, or it might be through conversations, it might be through finding an object of significance and using that as a point of view for reflection. So I really like tangible things to help me reflect. Like, that's one of my needs when I'm reflecting, and so I often offer that to other people, because just saying, right, go reflect, if we're not in the habit of it, reflecting on our experience, it can be quite tricky, because it's a skill like any other skill. It takes practice, and it takes developing techniques. Going into it cold is quite hard, and for those people who work with especially really young children who aren't in the habit of reflecting on their experience, that's not the developmental stage that they're at, and won't be for a little while, you know, it can be quite tricky to encourage children to reflect on something. So again, modeling those examples through training is then the same techniques that I might use with the children and the young people that I'm working with, and that habitual nature of reflection is, I think, something that people come to welcome through forest school training. And it was certainly something that when I went through the forest school training process, realised that I did reflection on. So I reflected on my experience, and reflected on what I was doing and how that affected other people. But what I didn't do was reflect with, and there's a difference there as well. So the reflection that I do internally, reflecting on, is different to the reflection with that I might do with the children and young people as part of a forest school session.
One of the things I picked up in that conversation was one word: tricky. So particularly that reflecting with, I'm guessing, and I know that from my own experience, that can be quite uncomfortable and really challenging. Just to, you can be in a vulnerable place, because if you're talking about yourself, that can be very vulnerable with others. Could you just expand a little bit more on how you might work with that, and how you do model that, both in the training and how people might continue doing that in their own practice?
I'm just thinking about the trickiest group to encourage reflection with, and it's a toss-up. Well, do I go for the sort of teenage boys who actually talking about yourself and your feelings and your emotions and your experience in front of others is just so mortifying? You know, that's a tricky one. But then there's also really young children, like I was saying before, they don't have that habit yet. They haven't got that practice of reflecting or even noticing self-awareness. Just a group of teenage boys I was working with recently, we tried reflecting with as a group once, and, you know, just to see if it would happen, because never assume, and nothing happened, which we thought might happen, but, you know, don't assume, right? You know, they might have just all opened up and started chatting, and it would have all been really interesting. It didn't. So what we tended to do was use the journey either from the site to the minibus. We'll get a bit of walk through the woods, and I'd say, oh, there's a question I'm quite interested in today, as we walk back, and then myself and colleagues would try and pair up and walk alongside different people to hear that, and one-to-one, that worked. That was more comfortable. And with the walk as well, so you're side by side rather than eye to eye, you might get something from that. Or sometimes on the minibus as well, somebody go, oh, there is this thing, and they'd tell you something, you know, after time, because, you know, reflection takes time, doesn't it, to reflect on experiences. So finding those ways that are acceptable, but also allowing get-outs with dignity, especially for those teenagers, you know, not putting somebody under pressure, not putting somebody on the spot. And one of the things that I definitely have increasingly avoided with reflection is the creeping circle of death. Now you tell me a thing, now you tell me a thing, now you tell me a thing. And somebody here is like, oh, everybody else has said something and it's going to be me next and I haven't got anything to say. And that's the only thing that they're actually reflecting on is how this circle's moving towards them and how uncomfortable that's making them feel. So allowing people to say nothing without it being obvious is also something, you know. Okay, I know 3 people here haven't talked. Anybody else who wants to add anything? If not, tell me afterwards. No? Okay, let's get out with dignity. And again, modelling that during training is important, because there are times when people don't have anything to say or don't have anything to say yet, and giving it time. And then, you know, somebody might come to you later going, I didn't say anything when we were talking about it, but I've been thinking about it since, you know. And that is also part of that process, isn't it? That trying to make it feel natural whilst being a conscious part of your practice is something that I feel like I'm starting to refine as a skill. And sometimes it's a conscious skill, and sometimes I do it in a way that makes people really uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I won't do that again. You know, and trying to find those techniques whilst allowing people time and space and dignity to get out is really, really, something that I'm working on. But then thinking about those really young children, like 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds, if you're working with that age, that increasing self-awareness and articulating that self-awareness isn't something that they've got as a developmental stage yet. So it does need to be quite a conscious process and quite a practice of it. And children that age can get into the practice of it. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they don't yet. I was a childminder for a little girl quite a few years ago. And so she 2 or 3 days a week, she and I would be, I was living in Minnesota, and we were living on the edge of a huge woodland forest, and then it went down to the Lake Superior. And so 2 or 3 days a week, the two of us would just roam through the forest down to the lake, or we'd maybe go on the bicycle somewhere and explore there. And every day, I'd done quite a lot of forest school training and practice at this point, and so every day, just instinctively, I wanted to reflect on our day together. We'd tell the story of the day, or we'd maybe do a little drawing, or I'd draw a cartoon of what happened, and I'd talk about different things, like, and sometimes I'd point stuff out. I was like, oh, this is the bit when the wheel fell off the bicycle, and I was really happy you stayed in the carrier and didn't get out and walk on the road, because I was quite scared at that point. And, you know, I'd talk about my emotions and model those. And she'd say, oh, I was happy here because we were by the lake, and, you know, she'd talk about what was her. And some days it wouldn't be much at all. It would just be like, what was your best bit? And it would say a thing that we liked, or what was your trickiest bit. But something about that regular practice of thinking about our emotions, thinking about our experience, thinking about what had happened, helped her become more emotionally intelligent, you know, helped her able to identify her emotions and explain them. And we were there for a few months, and yeah, I was out with her in the woods 2 or 3 days a week. And one of the things that her mum said at the end of that was that she'd noticed how much more confident her daughter was in talking about herself and what she needed and all those sort of things. And so this practice of reflection isn't just about us as facilitators getting insights into what's happening for other people to help us plan, to help us think about what's going on, but it's also about developing that skill within the individual so that they can manage things for themselves, so that they can explain their needs and their interests to other people. And that's the skill of being emotionally intelligent, and that's the skill that will lead to long-term contentment, because you can manage yourself and your emotions.
Cool, great, lots in there. There's sort of 3 words that come to my mind from all of that, is that obviously time and space, and the right space as well as is important, and timing. Just your little explanation with that child, sounds like actually the timing was quite important as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the end of a session, and it might be just during a session when suddenly they've opened up and you think, oh, the timing's right now for us to explore that a bit more. So I just wonder, given all that experience you've had, are there any particular models of reflection? Because you said it is a practice, and I just wonder whether there are any models that you've picked up on that help with that, start this practice of reflecting and developing and training ourselves in forest school, but also in connecting to nature and emotional intelligence and all the rest of the stuff and all the rest of the principles that we are trying to work with in a forest school setting.
You have spotted already, John, that I like a model. I like something that takes everything apart and then you look at all the different bits and go, but it's all the same thing. And so, yeah, I like a model like that. And my background is in play and play work. So a lot of the models and theories that still resonate with me are taken from that particular practice. And thinking about this conversation, in preparation for this conversation, I've been looking again at some work of Bob Hughes, and he talks about the different ways, and actually he used it as a way to reflect on a play space. So he that's the kind of intention he set for the particular model. It's called the I-Me model that people might have come across. And yeah, so he talks about it as play space, but actually you can apply it to anything and everything. So he talks about I, me, and I've even got a prop for this one. So the things that we might use as stimulus for reflection is our intuition. So just how do we feel about something? What comes up for us, that sort of instantaneous response for it. But then there's also the memory. So that's the sort of bigger picture things. It might be reflecting on your own childhood memories of and experiences. It might be thinking about things that you've, sort of big picture experience compared with the E. So I, me being I, am, E, the particular experience. So it might be a particular incident that you're reflecting on rather than the more general kind of broader picture of something. And then the other aspect is about the evidence. So what else have people thought about? And this actually, I was talking earlier about continuing professional development, this is often the one that challenges us. Our own experience and intuition and memory is often where we feel most comfortable. It's the thing where it fits with our own experience, our own beliefs, our own values. We kind of circle around our own internal dialogue, but the evidence can often be the one that can provoke us, can challenge us and move outside of that. And by evidence, I don't just mean research, that is one form of evidence, but it might also be talking to other practitioners about things and using that evidence. Yeah, okay, so this is another way that this could have gone. It might be reading books, it might be podcasts, talking books, other projects that you've done, working, mentors, all those sort of other external things, and using that evidence as a tool for reflection. So that is part of the reason why continuing professional development is important, because it's this stuff that challenges us. It's like, oh, I did a thing. Oh, there's another way that could have gone. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And that process of reflection, of stepping outside of yourself and looking, like that mirror I was saying about earlier, looking at yourself in the mirror, not just going, oh, well, that's all okay. That sort of single loop of, I did a thing, it went like this, how would I do it again? What shall I do next? I'll do a thing, it went like this. But actually going, I did a thing. Why did I do that? What are my values? What are my beliefs? What are the principles that I'm working on from that made me do that thing? And how did that react with a person who's got a very different set of principles and beliefs and values? And how did that interaction go? So you're actually stepping outside yourself and going for that much bigger, sort of more reflexive rather than reflective process. So actually, stepping outside your own box and looking at the box and going, oh, what is going on there, is one of those things that then actually will change your practice. That's where if you're going to transform yourself, you transform yourself and your practice in order that other people can access transformative stuff. You can't stay where you are. You've got to move outside of it. You've got to really get into that other loop, I guess, of thinking in order to get there. And then, so again, been looking at a book, and it's around here somewhere. It's underneath the teapot. I can't show it to you yet. On reflective practice in play work. I'm just going to dig it out. And there's a model in here that is quite interesting. So this is Jackie Kilvington and Ali Wood, and they talk about the different positions of reflection. So reflecting, let me get these the right way up. Reflecting before you take action, being one sort of reflection. Reflecting in the moment, so that something's happening right now. Should I do a thing? Maybe I shouldn't. oh no, now I do need to step in. You know, that sort of internal monologue that you have going on in your head while you're watching something happening. Do I need to be more involved? Is it safe? You know, all of that dialogue that's going on that whilst the action is happening. And then the reflection after the activity's taking place. So again, that sort of reflection, but after the moment has passed. But then also reflecting in inaction. And in the book, actually, they talk about reflecting on inaction. So what didn't I do? But I think there's something else in there about reflecting in inaction, which is kind of what this conversation is, right? We're not actively delivering forest school together. We're not training together or any of those things. But in this inaction, we get to really dig into and actually one of the things I thought was quite interesting is, you know, how do these link together? So, you know, the evidence is the stuff you want to be gathering before your action, and talking about your memories helps you reflect in the inaction. You know, kind of thinking about all of our experiences can really help with that. And those specific experiences is reflecting on those on action. So yeah, there's something in here that I think is quite interesting, because that intuition is the bit of reflection that we're doing in the moment. So, you know, we often act, don't we, instantly without thinking about, why did I do it that way? And then afterwards reflecting on those. So yeah, there's more juice to be had in there. You're sort of looking at these different models and thinking about different sorts of reflection, because it's not a singular thing. It's a complex activity.
Yeah. I guess what Jackie Kilvington and co are saying is this is a continuous process, and if we are to continue developing, and even developing during getting the qualification, we have to be reflecting all the time, both on what's happening and what's not happening. What struck me just while you were talking there's something about particularly reflecting on the inaction. There is something about listening to yourself, but listening to the group and listening to the place. And how do you help people do that really active, like that? And this is what's happening here, isn't it, in our little interview? Really trying to tune in and actively listen, both to what you're saying and what you're not saying. It's so it's just a fascinating process. I just want, well, how do we help practitioners do that when there is so much going on, but also listening to what's not going on? It's tricky one.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Yeah.
And I think that's where having other practitioners to reflect alongside can help prod you towards those things that maybe you didn't hear or see in the moment. And there was an interesting set of texts that I was just looking back through, again, thinking about reflection, from a colleague I work with a lot. So we're often sitting together, having a cup of tea after a session and chatting about things. And she'd been doing some work on her own. And so I got this text that just went, reflect with me. This is this text, reflect with me. And she comes up, I was like, okay, tell me what happened. And she wrote out a little narrative of something that happened in one of her sessions out in the woods with a group of children and adults and teachers. And I said, and then what happened? And then she kind of went into a little bit more. And at no point did I need to or have to tell her what was going on. But just having that empathetic buddy, you know, somebody just going, okay, and then what? It just helped her go beyond the first set of thoughts that she was having about something that hadn't necessarily gone with how she'd hoped it would, and the challenges that she faced. But just having that questioning, somebody to question her. And she knew that all I'd do was ask her a few questions. So that's why she said to reflect with me, you know, because she didn't want answers. She wanted a bit of provoking. And so having other people to reflect alongside, and that can be in lots of different ways, you know, finding those communities of learning. You know, I sometimes see them on social media. People have got questions, and often, do they actually want answers, or do they want that space in which to reflect? And maybe we need to be treating a lot of the forums and social media places as places to ask each other good questions, rather than trying to give each other answers. And that's something that, yeah, I really value in my interactions with others, is being asked those good questions, because we miss stuff all the time. Like there's one of my favourite examples is just going back to thinking about reflecting with really small children. So this is a group of 3 and 4 year olds, and we weren't quite in the habit yet of reflection and asking questions and being asked about ourselves. So, you know, I was kind of keeping it fairly simple and open. Maybe sort of said something like, you know, tell me what's been happening today, you know, as we were sitting having a snack. Tell me what you've all been doing today. And somebody went, oh, I found a worm, and somebody else is chatting about this and that. And then this one little lad, Tawheed, he goes, oh, my granddad's got a ladder. And I was like, okay, thanks, Tawheed. That's really good. Yeah. And then because somebody brought in a really interesting thought, somebody else went, my granddad's got a ladder. Like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, thanks, that's great, thanks, Frank. And then somebody, my granddad's just got a kitten. And then we're talking about, oh, I don't have a granddad. And then we're talking about granddads and ladders and all this sort of thing. And then the moment passed and we all moved on. And anybody who's been on one of my forest school training courses will probably heard me tell this story about one of the things that, you know, when you're talking with young children, you maybe just get what's in their head rather than a reflection on the session. But thinking about reflecting with other people as a community, some years later, I delivered training quite a lot with another trainer, Harriet. And so she'd heard this story a few times because I thought it was, yeah, I just think it's really funny. You know, my granddad's got a ladder just out of nowhere. Anyway, so Harriet, who's a very reflective practitioner, just goes, what had been happening in that session? I was like, what do you mean? She went, well, what else had been going on? Why did Tawheed say that his granddad had got a ladder? Like, why was that the thing that was in his head? And so for me, in my first thoughts, I just thought this is a really interesting example of how small children might not answer the question that you ask them. But being asked that question made me go back. Okay, yeah, why did Tawheed say that his granddad had got a ladder? What had been happening? Who were that group? What were the things that interested them? And they loved climbing trees. And there was also a wall that was quite dangerous that we tried to dissuade them from climbing from a lot, because it's very easy to climb, but it was also quite crumbly. And then there's one really good tree that was often dominated by a group of children who were trying to climb. And then there was other trees that we tried to climb at various points. And I can't remember, because it's going back quite a while, what had been happening in that specific session. But I know from the context that that was something that was interesting them. And I was like, my granddad's got a ladder. Oh, like Tawheed had pointed out the next step that I'd missed, you know, and it wasn't until years and years later, but you know, the moment is missed, isn't it? But that listening to what they're saying, not what the question that you've asked, of course, ladders. We need to be climbing, you know, we need to look for other ways of climbing rather than just that one tree that's quite good at the wall we're not allowed to go on. So yeah, we miss it. I mean, and let's acknowledge that again, going back to the being no experts, I miss stuff like that all the time, you know, like you because you can only make empathetic guesses about somebody else's experience. It might not be that. It might be that Tawheed just remembered his granddad had got a ladder, and that was interesting in the moment. But making those empathetic guesses and trying to offer something based on that is again part of that listening to what people haven't said in response to your question, but what they're trying to tell you.
That's that reminds me about some people call that the impulsive responder, where there's and that's where something comes back that has no relation to the teacher's context. You mentioned context there, and I think we have to be fully aware of our context, our belief systems, our values that we bring to this, which are different from the learners. And that's where we have to step back and think, oh my God, why did that happen? What's he talking about? He's got obviously gone off to a different context, and that's why that's come out there. And we come in with our own particular frame almost. And like you say, I think it takes training to step out of that frame. And the people often, they've done the qualification, they think that's it. There's one way to whittle a spoon. Absolutely not. There's hundreds of ways of whittling a spoon, depending upon your own experience, your own context, all the rest of it. And I think that's what this is all about. It's often trying to accept I've got my own context, my own framing, but so have other people got their own framing, and it's how do we meet that and build relationship. And I think the word that I picked up on big time was empathy. How do you help people learn to empathize both with themselves but with others? Because it sounds like it's that continuous conversation that you're having with yourself and your body and the place you're in, and also with others' selves, place, the body they're in. And I just wonder how we get into that mindset, and how, if you've got any ways you try and encourage people to get into that mindset, both your learners, so that they can be more empathetic as well, and as you said, emotionally intelligent, but also for us as practitioners.
I think one of the things that's worth recognizing when we're talking about reflection, that it isn't always comfortable and it isn't always easy. You know, when I'm reflecting on, so even that example I just told you of Tawheed and the ladder, you know, part of the thing in there is kind of my recognition that I missed something, you know, like the bit of me that wants to be judgmental on myself goes, oh, I did it wrong. Oh, you know, and that trying to not be trying to be kind to ourselves is part of that reflective process as well, isn't it? It's like, yeah, okay, so how can I take that awareness into my next interaction, that there was something there that I potentially missed? And, you know, we talk about empathy and social skills and those really big, refined human capacities. But actually, if you wind it back, it starts with self-awareness. You can't empathize with others if you aren't aware of yourself and what your emotions are telling you. Sort of looking at some of the models like Daniel Goleman's stuff on emotional intelligence, you know, that's one of the things that he says, is that the empathy isn't the starting point, self-awareness and self-regulation is. And when I'm looking at the learners that I'm with, more thinking children now, but sometimes adults, that if they haven't developed that habit of self-awareness, then, or self-regulation, actually, for a lot of the learners I work with, that they might be self-aware, but unable to regulate. Like, that's the place where you need to start if you're going to move towards empathy. Take time for reflective practice, is because it, you know, that those fundamental skills that we're developing for other people, but we need to be mindful of including ourselves in that actually as well, so that when we're reflecting with, that we don't exclude the adults in the group as part of that reflection. And I think it's always really important to hear, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, how did you find that? And did you find anything tricky today? Or, you know, so I always invite other adults in the group into that reflection, because I think it's important for children to see that people struggle, right? And that self-awareness is part of that struggle, and sort of being kind to yourself during that struggle is one of the things I'd really love to be able to consistently model to people. That's something that, you know, if they get nothing else, then that's a really powerful tool for growth and development. So empathy is a really key skill of this. This is, as a practitioner, that's the thing that we need to be just always trying to flex that muscle of empathy, you know, really work that muscle, but also being empathetic to ourselves and being kind of, you know, gentle on ourselves in those moments when things are tricky, especially, or when things go wrong, or when there's an accident, or, you know, somebody's hurt or injured. It's our reflective practice that will help us work through that to a point where we're a stronger practitioner rather than a less confident one.
Yeah, great. So I just wonder whether, in terms of our own self-reflection, any particular ways, techniques, because we all reflect in slightly different ways, don't we? We've all got different learning styles and all the rest of it, that you have found useful for yourself, but that you might open up in the training as well.
So you might or might not have noticed over the years, John, I draw pictures of things. That's how I get things out of my head and so I can look at them from a distance. And that's, you know, for some people that's a technique that works. Other people write and journal. And certainly when I started trying to be a conscious reflective practitioner, I had a notebook in which I tried to write every, after every session. And what I found was that that doesn't work for me. That's not how I move things out of my own head. And it is very personal, isn't it? For other people, taking photographs and journaling and things like that can be a really useful technique. And certainly for some of the children that I work with, that's a technique that really helps. So we talk about reflection not just being at the end of a session, but one of the things that I really love is reflecting at the beginning of a session, because it moves you back into that space where you were before. And I often have made big journals, so big floor books, in which I've then put pictures from sessions and maybe written down comments and things that I've heard children say. And so then at the start of sessions, they're looking at that in preparation to go back into that space. And that really helps get things into that long-term memory, because that's one of the things that reflection is, isn't it? It's moving things from now here into the long-term memory, which is where your beliefs, your emotions, your, that sort of memory part of your brain exists. And that's how you kind of hold all of that as part of yourself. So journals, that's a really sort of nice technique. And talking, conversations, finding those empathetic buddies, people to ask you good questions, can be really helpful. And actually, sometimes, right, here's a confession, sometimes I'm in the van on the way home from a session and I'm having a little chat to myself. I'm talking out loud as I'm driving, as if I'm talking to another, because I need to move that outside of my own head and my own experience in order to process it in different ways.
Yeah, it is different ways, isn't it? I sometimes sing.
Yeah.
Gets it into my body and stuff. So I'll sometimes, I'll never forget one group that we had one girl who just was silent, but when she was out in the woods, she used to sing. And we'd then from that, I sort of would start the session with a song, but then we started, actually, it got infectious. We made up a song sometimes halfway through the session or through the session about the session. And it just seemed to, particularly for this particular learner, Lydia, she'd take that back into the class for the first time because she'd cemented it in her own way. She just loved singing and getting it into her head and her body through song and a bit of dance as well. You could see her skipping. She called the forest school her New York, and she'd be singing New York, New York. And that's how it all started. It was just funny, and that was her way of really deeply getting it out, but also cementing it in her own brain body. So I guess it's sometimes the trick is just finding out what is the best way for people to really reflect on this and to really internalize what this means. Yeah.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier with the challenges of reflecting with, is often about time, right? So many times, especially when everybody's really deeply immersed in something, and you look at your watch and you're like, we're meant to be back at school, it's lunchtime, right? Come on, children, pack up, grab all the things. You're wrapping up the top as you're walking back out of the site. And then finding time for reflection in those moments is so hard. But actually, I think one of the things that I found is the more that reflection with has become a habit of mine, the more I can't leave a session without something. So, it might just be, when we get to the top of the hill, tell me something about this. And then as people come past and I'm just checking we've got everybody and counting them off the site, they're just telling me one thing about the day. It's just like, if you plan it into your sessions, it might happen. And if you don't plan for it, it definitely doesn't happen. Right? But if you have a few tricks up your sleeve. So like singing, there was one group that we had quite a long walk and it was up a hill. And so we'd often sing to motivate ourselves and use sort of like little, because there were younger children, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, we'd use those sort of nursery rhyme song hooks, like, I went to forest school, E-I-N-T, I went to forest school, what did you do? And then somebody would shout it out and we'd sing that, and we'd use that as a way of call and response. Just, if nothing else, we'd run out of time for anything else. Hearing perspectives of other people. Because, you know, for that age group, that was a really good starting point of self-awareness, is to hear that other people have experienced something that you've experienced, but experienced it differently. And then you're like, oh, I didn't do that, or oh, that wasn't my favourite thing. Just hearing other people's perspectives is that first step, I think, for very young children.
Yeah, so we could go on for days. I think
We could.
It is a lifelong process, isn't it? It is lifelong. It's a completely lifelong process. And as ever, I've just relished this. We're coming near the end. So I just wonder, in terms of this principle, whether there's something that you could just share with us at the end that is really deeply about yourself, and why it is so important for you, and it's probably based on something that's happened in the past or gradually built up cumulatively over the years. Just a nice little Lily story to finish us off on. So you've always been this for me ever since I've known you for the last 20 odd years and more. Deeply reflective, I think. So I just wonder whether there's one little Lilyism to finish us off.
So no pressure. And also the fact I've known you for 20 years, I was clearly a child at the time, yes? Why is reflective practice important? Or why is it that for me? I don't know if I can. I think it is like a lifelong conversation about this. I don't know if there's one thing that really sums it up. But I guess if we think about why is it really something for me, is that, I mean, I struggled in education for a lot of my sort of formal education. I struggled quite a lot, but I was always staring out the window and having a little bit of a think. And that reflective practice is possibly something that I was developing then. And that sort of noticing myself and how I learned, and reflecting on how teachers maybe weren't teaching me in the way that I learnt, and I was often staring out the window because I was having to reprogram what they were teaching me into a way that I learnt, or doodling and getting told off for that and those sort of things. So I wonder if that's why I'm really keen to encourage that process of reflective practice, because it's about becoming self-aware and knowing yourself and how you learn. And if you've got that, like, it's really powerful. I feel like in the last 10 years, maybe since I've been doing forest school training for 10 years or so now, and I think I know more about how I learn as a learner from this last 10 years of trying to help other people learn. And it's really powerful. You know, I've unlocked my own capacities in a way that I don't think I had done previously, because I've reflected on other people's learning, become more aware of that. And that's, you know, it's kind of that virtual cycle, so that now I don't even bother trying to write stuff down. I'll just draw a picture and then put two words next to it, because that, I know that means more to me, and I'll come back to it in a different way. So I think that is part of that really important stuff of reflective practice, is knowing yourself, empathizing with yourself, and treating yourself gently so that you can unlock those capacities. And maybe that's why it's interesting, because I'd like to learn everything, please, thank you. And yeah. And maybe this is the tool that I'm working on to help me with that.
Great, thanks, Lily. That's a good place to finish, I think. Know thyself. So this is just one in a series of seminars that we've been exploring the 6 principles, and if you want to know more, just have a look at the website links that we've got and see the other 5 videos that we've produced, plus one that's going to introduce the whole thing. And yeah, I just suggest that people go off and reflect on this little conversation that we've had. So thanks a lot, Lily, and no doubt we'll see each other very soon.
And we could reflect on reflecting on the process of reflecting with others on reflection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Yeah, it's been brilliant. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.